That morning, I woke up and saw the family photo on the shelf turned face down. There were no children's voices calling, "Grandma," no scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, only a silence so heavy it felt alive. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was the hollow kind, the kind that tells you something has broken, even if you can't yet name what it is. I sat up. The blanket slipped off my shoulders and my feet touched the cold floor. Light filtered through the curtains, landing on the photo frame turned upside down like a quiet reminder. Sometimes, the things we love most can turn their backs on us without a sound. If you've ever felt forgotten in your own home, ever cooked meals for people who no longer sit down to eat with you, then this story is for you. It's not a story about anger or revenge, but about a woman's journey to reclaim her dignity, her love, and the peace she thought she had lost forever. Before I continue, please give me a moment. And if you believe others need to hear this too, consider subscribing. Not to support me, but to help preserve real stories about family, kindness, and the quiet strength of those who rise again after being left behind. My name is Eleanor Hughes, 74 years old, and this is the story of a Thanksgiving morning, the day I woke up in my familiar home to find no one there. I live in the suburbs of Cedar Valley, Oregon, a place so quiet you can sometimes hear the wind threading through the old pines. 3 generations share this house: my son, Daniel, my daughter-in-law, Laura, my 2 grandkids, Mia and Ben, and me. I used to think I was lucky, surrounded by children's laughter, the smell of fresh pastries, and the sound of Daniel's coffee maker whirring at exactly 6 a.m., like a small family ritual of love. But that morning, Thanksgiving morning, everything was different. No sound woke me. No knock on the door from Ben asking, "Grandma, are you up yet?" No Mia singing in the living room, no Laura complaining about the messy kitchen. Only silence, thick and heavy, wrapped around the house like a blanket without warmth. I sat up and pulled the curtain aside. Pale golden light slipped in, touching the familiar things. Robert's old armchair, where my late husband used to read the paper, the oak dining table I polished every weekend, and the family photo on the shelf. But that photo was turned face down. I froze. Somehow, that small detail sent a chill through my chest. The picture was from last year, everyone in matching red sweaters, smiling brightly in front of the Christmas tree. I remember Daniel laughing too hard and Laura insisting I tilt my head to look younger. Now their faces lay turned to the wood, as if even the photo couldn't bear to look at me. I stepped into the hallway. The air was cold. The kids' room was empty, their blankets neatly folded. I went down to the kitchen. No coffee. An oddity in itself. Daniel always woke before me. He knew I liked my coffee strong and never once forgot to make it for me. Today, the coffee pot was dry. On the table, there was only a folded note, pinned under a glass vase. I opened it. Laura's handwriting, round and neat, as steady as if she hadn't hesitated for a second. "Mom, Daniel, and I took the kids to Florida for the holidays. Please rest at home. You wouldn't be able to handle the long flight. We'll be back soon." D and L, I read it once. Then again. Each time, the words grew colder. You wouldn't handle the long flight. It sounded caring, but carried the taste of a decision already made. No one had asked if I wanted to go. No one cared whether I might feel lonely on the most family-centered day of the year. I set the note down, my hands trembling slightly. Then I laughed. Not loudly, just a soft, dry sound meant only for myself. Maybe I really was old enough for people to think I no longer needed to be there. I opened the cupboard, took out the coffee grounds, and made my own. As the water boiled, the aroma filled the kitchen, blending with the dim morning light. The sound of the coffee dripping, tick, 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 felt like a clock marking the beginning of a new chapter. I poured a cup and sat in my usual chair by the table. Outside, mist still clung to the fence. A small sparrow landed on the window frame, tilted its head toward me, then flew away. I watched it. The tiny, free movement I'd never noticed all these years spent living for others. A light breeze stirred the paper on the table. I placed my hand on it, keeping it still. The paper was thin, but the weight inside it felt like stone. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, just empty. I sat there, listening to the clock tick, and realized the silence that morning wasn't peace. It was an ending. Soft, quiet, but final, of something that had died long before I ever admitted it. Next, I'll tell you what led me to that morning. It began 3 years earlier, when the person I loved most left this world. 3 years ago, Robert Hughes, my husband, passed away after 52 years of marriage. He left quietly on a spring morning as gently as he had lived. I remember that morning vividly, the thin sunlight slipping through the curtains, the kettle whistling, and me still wondering what to cook for lunch. When I brought in his cup of tea, he was still sitting there, head slightly tilted, a faint smile resting on his lips. I called his name, but he didn't answer. After the funeral, the house became too big. Every afternoon when the sunset spilt through the windows, that empty armchair kept me from stepping into the living room. My entire life had been as Robert's wife, a quiet man with kind eyes. When he was gone, I didn't know what to do with the leftover mornings, the dinners for one, and the ticking clock that filled the silence. A month later, Daniel, my son, came to visit. He sat across from me, his large hand resting gently over mine. "Mom, I don't think you should live alone anymore," he said softly, but there was a hint of insistence in his tone. "There's a spare room downstairs. Come live with us. You'll be closer to the kids. It'll be fun. Being alone like this will just make you sick." I looked at Daniel, the same face I used to cradle to sleep every night, now with fine lines at the corners of his eyes. I wanted to believe he meant it from the heart, and I did. Laura, my daughter-in-law, added sweetly, "I'd feel so much better if you stayed with us. Besides, I work all day, and having you help with the kids would be amazing. You must get lonely here, right?" I smiled, not finding anything wrong with what she said. So I sold my little house, the one Robert and I had lived in our whole lives, and saved what money I could. Daniel told me they were planning to buy a bigger place with a yard for the kids and a separate room for me. I contributed $60,000, calling it an investment in the family's future. It sounded noble, and in my heart, it meant love. The first few months were lovely. I woke early to brew coffee and prepare breakfast. The children would run in and throw their arms around my neck. Daniel laughed more, and Laura was warm, often asking for my cooking advice. In the evenings, we'd watch movies together. I knitted scarves while the kids argued over whose turn it was to talk about school. I thought, "Robert, do you see this? Our family is doing just fine." But slowly, things began to change. At first, it was small comments. Laura said, "Mom, I think I'll reorganize the kitchen. It'll be more efficient." Then she began rearranging the things I had arranged by habit. Daniel grew busier, quieter. And me? I cooked, did laundry, and took care of the children. No one told me to, but if I didn't, everything seemed to stop functioning. One night, Daniel came home late. I heard them talking in the hallway. Laura's voice was low but clear. "You know we can't kick your mother out. She paid for half the house." I stood frozen in the dark. The words didn't cut deep, but they were sharp enough to keep me awake all night. The next morning, Laura smiled as usual. "Mom, I saved you a piece of cake." But that smile no longer felt warm. A month later, Daniel lost his job. He didn't tell me, but I knew, from his eyes, from the way he avoided the bills. I quietly paid the utility bills from my savings, leaving the money on the kitchen counter without a name. I thought, that's what a mother should do. But soon, it became a habit. Every time something went wrong, I opened my wallet, trying to patch over the cracks, as if money could hold affection in place. As time passed, words of thanks became rarer until they disappeared completely. My work in the house became invisible, like a chair or a table, just part of the background. If I didn't wake up early to make breakfast, Laura would sigh, "I thought you knew the kids have to leave early for school today." Not reproach, just expectation. At night, I sat alone in my room, listening to the television from the living room, realizing I was living in my son's house, but I didn't belong there. One afternoon, I went out to water the garden. Next door was Mrs. Clara Weston, 68, living alone. She saw me and chuckled, her voice roughened by years of smoking. "Eleanor, you look tired. Keep doing all that and they'll just think you like being used." I laughed it off. "Oh no, I'm just helping. Helping your children is a joy." Clara looked at me, her gaze firm and direct. "Joy is only real when others see it as yours too. If they see it as your duty, then you're just hurting yourself." I didn't reply, but her words stayed in my mind for months. Looking back, I know, it didn't begin with cruelty. It began with love and a fear of loneliness. I confused being needed with being loved, and when people only need you for convenience, one day they'll leave you behind the moment you're no longer helpful. That was the lesson I paid for, with my old home, with years of gentle motherhood, and with that empty Thanksgiving morning I told you about. Yet, strangely enough, on that silent morning, I didn't fall apart. I was clear-headed, and for the first time in years, I began to think for myself. I sat for a long time in the kitchen, the note Daniel left still lying on the table, flat and cold as stone. Noon sunlight streamed through the window, glinting off the familiar objects around me. Everything was silent, yet it felt as if each item was looking at me, asking, "How much longer will you keep enduring this?" My eyes wandered around the house. The silver refrigerator in the corner, I bought it 2 years ago when Laura said the old one looked outdated. The cream-colored sofa in the living room, I picked it because Daniel said it matched the curtains. The washing machine, the TV, the microwave, the cookware. Every single thing had been paid for by me, yet no one ever mentioned it. I remembered the morning I carried that TV home from the store, my heart oddly light because Daniel had said, "I'll watch the Super Bowl with Dad. Get the big one, Mom." Robert had died a month before that. The TV never broadcast a single game between father and son. It only played those cheerful family sitcoms, where everyone smiles, but outside the screen, the silence grows heavier. I looked around and quietly said to myself, if I could buy it, I can take it with me. The words sounded strange, as if they didn't belong to me. Maybe it was Robert's voice, or maybe it was the voice of my own reason, one I had silenced for 3 long years. I stood up and opened the old drawer in the study. Inside was a thick yellow folder, packed with receipts and invoices. I'd always been the careful one. Robert used to laugh and say I even saved receipts for light bulbs. But today, those pieces of paper had become proof of my right to reclaim ownership over the rest of my life. I went through them one by one, sorting, clipping, and labeling them clearly. Each receipt was a fragment of memory. Sofa, $2,000, purchased by Eleanor Hughes. 55-inch TV, Eleanor Hughes. Washing machine, refrigerator, coffee maker, all under my name. I took a deep breath and made a call. A man's voice answered, "Silver Line Moving, good morning." "I need a truck and 3 movers," I said. "Tomorrow morning, 7:30. "Ma'am, tomorrow's Thanksgiving. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I replied. "It'll be the day I start over." I hung up, and in that moment, it felt as though I had just signed a Declaration of Independence for my own life. The next morning, the air was cold and misty. When the white Silver Line truck pulled up to the driveway, I was ready. 3 young men climbed out, and I greeted them with a gentle smile and a plate of cookies I'd baked the night before. "Just point to what's going, ma'am," one of them said. "Everything I paid for," I answered. My voice didn't tremble. I handed them the folder of receipts, each one a confirmation of payment. Soon the sound of moving filled the house. The TV, the sofa, the dining table, all carefully wrapped. I didn't feel regret, only a strange calm, watching the rooms grow emptier, as if the house was being cleansed of all pretense, returning to something honest. Around noon, a young woman's voice called from the gate, "Mrs. Hughes! Are you okay? Who are those people?" It was Kelly, the young neighbor across the street, who'd moved in 2 months earlier. She looked worried, glancing from the truck to me. "I saw them taking things out non-stop. I was afraid someone was scamming you." I smiled, light as a breath. "No, Kelly, they're helping me move. Everything you see, they're all mine." She hesitated, nodded uncertainly, and walked away. But minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house. I wasn't surprised. Kelly had called them out of concern, and that was kind. A young officer approached, voice formal but polite. "Mrs. Hughes, someone reported you might be a victim of fraud. Do you have proof of ownership for these items?" I nodded, opened the yellow folder, and handed him the receipts one by one. He skimmed through them, then looked up, his tone softening. "You have everything in order, ma'am. Sorry for the disturbance. We were just following procedure." I smiled. "It's all right, officer. Sometimes you have to prove you have the right to live your own life." Just then, Clara, my next-door neighbor, stepped through the fence. She still had her cup of tea in hand, her voice gravelly but firm. "I'll vouch for her. She bought everything. I remember each piece." The officer thanked her and left. When the police cars drove away, Clara turned to me, eyes gleaming with pride. "I told you, Eleanor. Don't let anyone decide the rest of your life for you." I smiled back. "This time," I said, "I'm really listening." By late afternoon, the house was almost empty. I gathered a few small things: Robert's photographs, an old Bible, a broken desk clock. Then I walked through the house one last time. Every room still held my footsteps, but none of them held me anymore. I took the key, tied it with a red ribbon, Robert's favorite color, and placed it on the kitchen table beside a handwritten note, my lettering steady and neat. "Thank you for the years we shared. Everything I'm taking belongs to me, and so does the rest of my life." I laid the note carefully on the table and opened the door. A gust of cold wind swept in, carrying the scent of young pine from the garden. I turned back for one last look. No anger, no tears, just the weightless calm of someone setting down a heavy burden after a long road. I climbed into the truck and took a seat in the passenger's seat. The driver asked, "Where to, ma'am?" "To Maple Garden, the senior living community," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "This time, I think I'll live for myself." As the truck rolled forward, I looked out the window. The house behind me shrank into a small square, then vanished beyond the trees. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. The moving truck stopped in front of Daniel's house the afternoon they returned. Later, when I watched the security camera footage, it captured everything in detail. Laura entered first, dragging her suitcase, her face tanned from the beach. Daniel followed behind, carrying a few bags. Mia and Ben ran ahead, laughing, pulling each other toward the living room. And then, within seconds, their faces changed. Laura opened her suitcase, then froze. Daniel looked around, the surprise on his face turning into panic. Mia started crying. Ben clung to his mother's leg, terrified. Daniel shouted, his voice echoing through the empty house. "What happened here? Where's all our stuff?" In the video, Laura pulled out her phone to make a call. The sounds of crying, hurried footsteps, and neighbors gathering outside blended into chaos. They called the police. They said they'd been robbed. They said they had no idea how everything could disappear in just a few hours. When Daniel called me for the first time, his voice was a mix of fear and fury. "Mom, where are you? The house is empty. The TV, the sofa, even the refrigerator's gone. Explain this." I listened calmly and asked only one question. "Did you check the camera?" He went silent. The footage showed it all. They came home, discovered the emptiness, panicked, and called 911. They were frantic. They called me. But they never once considered that maybe, just maybe, those things had been mine. A few hours later, 2 police officers arrived at my new place, Maple Garden, not far from Cedar Valley. They knocked on the door of the room I'd just received the keys to. I opened it with a polite smile. One was young and stern, the other was older and calm. "Mrs. Eleanor Hughes?" the younger one asked. "That's me," I said. He explained, "We received a report of a burglary at your son's residence. The report mentioned security footage of a suspicious moving operation." I led them to the small living area, poured some water, and offered them seats. I felt strangely composed. Then I handed over the yellow folder, every receipt, every invoice neatly signed in my name. The young officer's brow furrowed as he looked through the papers. The older one gave a small, knowing smile. "Forensics already checked the scene," the older man said. "If you have documentation like this, we see no criminal evidence linking you to theft." The young one hesitated, his voice softer but still questioning. "Don't you feel any guilt, Mrs. Hughes? Taking things out of your son's house, on a holiday no less. The kids came home to nothing. They think you robbed them." I met his gaze squarely. Guilt? For reclaiming what I paid for with my own retirement money? I lived there. I contributed to that home. I paid for everything. They decided to leave for vacation without asking me, leaving me behind. I don't call that theft. I call it self-defense. The young officer sighed, glancing again at the receipts. "Legally, if you have evidence, we can't press charges." The older officer put a hand on his partner's shoulder and said quietly, "Sometimes, family matters need heart more than handcuffs." When they left, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Daniel called over and over. Laura texted. They were furious, hurt, and confused. They didn't understand why I did it. They believed they'd been robbed, and the prime suspect was their own mother. Their anger quickly turned into legal resolve. Within weeks, Daniel and Laura filed a civil lawsuit claiming emotional distress and property loss. It made me falter for a moment. I had never wanted a confrontation, but the yellow folder was still there, plain, undeniable. The morning of the hearing at the Benton County Courthouse was gray. I wore a simple coat, pulled on a knit hat, and carried the folder carefully. A thought crossed my mind. Does justice ever account for emotion? The courtroom was small, with a faint smell of old wood and paper. The judge was a middle-aged man, clear-eyed and calm. Daniel, and Laura sat side by side. Laura looked tense, trying to hold her composure. Daniel's face was red, his fists clenched. They were my children, and the tangle of their emotions filled me with both sorrow and understanding. Their attorney spoke first, voice firm. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hughes's actions have caused significant emotional harm and disrupted the family's stability. Her sudden behavior deeply affected the children. We are seeking $10,000 in damages for replacement costs and emotional distress." My attorney, a composed woman with a gentle tone, opened the yellow folder, laying out each receipt. TV, sofa, refrigerator, washing machine. Everything is clearly marked under my name. She said simply, "Every item Mrs. Hughes took was purchased by her, under her name. The move was entirely lawful." As the judge flipped through the pages, the air in the courtroom thickened. Daniel stood, walking to the microphone, his voice hoarse. "She took our things, Your Honor, our everyday life. The kids' toys, their books, everything gone. My mother didn't say a word before she did it." I rose after him, my steps steady. I felt the weight of every gaze, some curious, some judgmental. I walked to the front, looked straight at Daniel, and said the words that froze the room. "You call it loss. You call it betrayal. But tell me, when you left your mother alone on Thanksgiving, when you decided to go without even asking, wasn't that betrayal too?" Silence fell like a curtain. Laura's cheeks flushed red. Daniel stepped back, unable to answer. The judge's voice cut through, measured but firm. "Mrs. Hughes, Please keep your remarks within order." I nodded. My voice stayed calm. "I understand their pain. I never meant to hurt them. But the law relies on evidence. I bought those things. I supported the family when they needed me. And when I realized I had become nothing more than a resource, something to be used, I chose to reclaim part of my own life. I left a note. I hid nothing. They may find that upsetting, but it isn't a crime." The judge looked up, his eyes moving between the papers. Then Clara, my neighbor, was called as a witness. She entered slowly, surveying the room before speaking in her rough, steady voice. "I've known Eleanor for years. She's not the kind of person to do something like this out of spite. Those things she took, she bought them. I remember every purchase. She used to come home from the appliance store smiling, saying, 'This one's for the new house.'" Clara went on to describe how I had quietly helped pay Daniel's bills when he lost his job, how I cooked for the kids, how I was always the one ready to help. Her testimony tied the story together and weakened the case against me to the point of irreparable damage. After listening to everything, the judge leaned forward and tapped the desk lightly. "This case concerns civil property ownership. Having reviewed the evidence, the court finds that the items in question were all purchased by Mrs. Eleanor Hughes under her own name. Therefore, legally, her actions do not constitute theft or civil violation. The claim is dismissed." A ripple moved through the room, some sighs of relief, some of disappointment. Daniel covered his face. Laura wept quietly. They left their seats slowly, walking toward the hallway. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. As they passed me, Daniel looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Laura turned away, tears streaming. I watched them for a moment and said softly, not with anger, but with quiet sorrow, "Family isn't something you can buy, but you can lose it if you forget how to treat one another." Those words didn't heal anything right away, but at least they were the truth, spoken out loud in a courtroom. I gathered my folder and felt a lightness inside me. Not the victory of winning, but the peace of finally being free. Since the trial, time has flowed quietly, like a slow spring river. I stayed on at Maple Garden, where mornings begin with the chirping of sparrows and evenings end with sunlight slanting through a small window. No shouting, no rushing voices, just the smell of coffee, warm toast, and the kind of peace I had forgotten existed. Clara still visits often. She once brought me a pot of wild daisies and said, "These flowers live long, just like you." We usually sit on the balcony, sipping tea and watching the older residents stroll through the courtyard below. Every now and then, Mr. George Franklin, a new resident from the 3rd floor, stops by. He's a gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes, a retired literature teacher. Whenever I tell an old story, he chuckles and says, "You have a way of telling things that makes people sad and comforted all at once. Like reading a book you know will end sadly, but you still want to turn the final page." I no longer ache when Daniel or Laura are mentioned. The old pain has softened into something almost tender, like a worn-out sweater, frayed at the shoulders but still warm. That autumn, Maple Garden began decorating for the Thanksgiving holiday. Fairy lights hung along the porch, the scent of pumpkin and cinnamon drifted through the hallways. Clara, George, and a lady named Martha from the 2nd floor invited me to host a small dinner. Just 4 people, but everyone was excited. I roasted honey-glazed chicken, Clara made mashed potatoes, George brought red wine, and Martha baked pumpkin pie. We set the table in the standard room, a small wooden table, candles flickering softly. As I was arranging the plates, Clara asked, "Why are there 5 plates?" "There are only 4 of us." I smiled, light as a breath. "That one is for anyone who's lost their way, but might still find their way home." No one said another word. They simply nodded. I saw the candlelight reflected in their eyes, warm and steady, like faith. We ate, we laughed, we shared stories about people who had gone, about those who once hurt us but still left traces of love in our memories. The evening felt strange in the most gentle way, not lively, but peaceful, like a quiet prayer. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clean the dishes. The night was still. Moonlight lay soft across the table. When I turned around, the empty plate was still there, the light catching on its rim as if it were waiting for something. I sat down and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was the building's mail carrier, holding a small beige envelope. He said, "Mrs. Hughes, a letter for you, from Cedar Valley." I took it. My heart slowed. The handwriting on the envelope was Daniel's. I sat down carefully and opened it. Inside were just a few lines, written in the familiar hand. "Mom, I'm sorry for the things I didn't understand. I let Laura do things I should have stopped. I miss you. If you'll allow it, I'd like to bring the kids to visit. I'm not sure if you'd want that, but I hope you're doing well. Daniel." I read it again and again. The letters trembled slightly as if they had been written with hesitation. I didn't know if he would truly come, or if he wrote the note just to ease his conscience. But I smiled, folded the letter, and placed it in the drawer beside Robert's photograph. "Do you see that?" "Robert?" I whispered. "He's finally learning how to come home." That night, I didn't sleep right away. I opened the window, letting the cold air flow in. Distant lights shimmered faintly on the glass, fading into the fog. I thought about everything: the old house, the TV, the note left on the table, the courtroom, and the tears that fell there. All of it had become chapters of a closed book. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness is choosing not to let the past drag you down anymore. It's looking at a wound and recognizing that it is healed. That's what remains. Just a scar, proof that you were strong enough to survive. I looked at the empty plate still sitting on the table and murmured to myself, sometimes silence is God's way of teaching us to listen to our hearts. And when we are kind enough to let go, family can find its way back, no matter how lost it once was. If this story makes you think of someone in your own family, someone you once loved, drifted away from, or hurt, call them today. Don't let silence turn into a wall. And if you want to hear more true stories like this one, subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories about kindness, about healing, about the small, simple things that can soften even the hardest hearts. Because who knows, what you hear today might be the very thing that helps someone, somewhere, find their way home.